The movie begins in a secluded research institution in 1993. A lady by the name of Dr. Florence Weaver explains in her video journal that her study subject, Gabriel, has become too powerful and unmanageable. A security officer then interrupts her to let her know that Gabriel has left his cell once more. Dr. Weaver observes another doctor being tossed against the wall by none other than Gabriel, while the electricity flickers throughout the facility. Gabriel then injures the security guard, but Dr. Weaver is able to put him to sleep before he causes any more damage. She gives the order for several security officers to seatbelt him. Despite being debilitated by the medication, Gabriel continues to broadcast his ideas over the radio and makes a threat to execute every hospital employee. Dr. Weaver advises cutting out the cancer as they are unable to help Gabriel. Fast forward to Madison Lake, who is pregnant and resides with her violent husband Derek 27 years later. Madison's husband advises her not to become pregnant, and they are fighting about Madison's numerous miscarriages over the years. Derek, being the complete scumbag that he is, slams her head against the wall in the heat of the moment, causing it to bleed. Madison is frightened by this and spends the remainder of the day locked in her bedroom. That evening, a disturbance from the kitchen wakes up Madison's husband, who is dozing off on the couch downstairs. He turns to glance around and notices that the smoothie maker is in action. He switches it off, but as he returns to the living room, an intruder sneaks up behind him without his knowledge. We can see that Madison's pillow is stained with blood from the back of her head as she wakes up from her dream. The incident was a nightmare, it turned out. She wakes up, scared from the nightmare she just had about her spouse, and goes downstairs to look for him. But to her shock, she finds Derek's lifeless body with what appears to be a reversed head. She notices the thing crouched by her spouse and realizes it wasn't a dream after all. The thing pursues her as she flees for her life. Even though Madison makes it back to her room, the ghost enters and knocks her asleep. Even though there are no indications of forced entry, detectives are summoned to investigate the incident, which is being considered a home invasion. The awful news that Madison suffered a miscarriage as a result of the incident at her home is delivered to her when she is visiting her sister Sydney in a hospital the next morning. The next day, Detective Shaw shows up to see Madison at the hospital. Sydney, who wasn't aware of Madison's prior 3 miscarriages, learns about them when he chats with her. Later, Madison's neighbor informs the cops that Madison's husband was inappropriate with her. The detectives start to believe that Madison is the murderer due to their history of domestic violence. Madison is discharged from the hospital 2 weeks later and goes back to her house after fully recovering. Strangely, the first night, she discovers a streetlight just below flashing before becoming dark. She hurries to lock all of her home's doors and cover all of its windows after spotting a creature standing nearby in the pitch black. She is not quick enough, and one of the doors won't close correctly due to a problem. She quickly enters her bedroom and assures herself that monsters don't exist. However, she still feels afraid, and the entire night she cannot sleep. Madison makes every door in the house more secure in the morning, which confuses her sister Sydney when she comes over to check on her. During their sincere talk, Madison says that she and Sydney are not linked genetically. Madison was adopted when she was 8 years old, and she has no recollection of her life before then. Serena, a middle-aged tour guide who works on the other side of the city, is wrapping up her shift when she hears noises coming from a dark hallway. She flicks on the lights out of curiosity to see what's going on. She is suddenly ambushed by the creature, who is later identified as Gabriel. She is taken prisoner and imprisoned in his nest. He removes her phone and makes a call to Dr. Weaver, his intended target. Gabriel calls Dr. Weaver in the present to remind her of something she said in the past. This prompts her to open her previous patient files and start to remember something. Madison is doing her laundry at home later that evening when the house lights start to flicker and Madison's head wound starts to bleed once more. Dr. Weaver's house appears next to her as she loads the towel into the washer. Dr. Weaver is abruptly attacked by Gabriel, who starts throwing her around. Madison now appears to be immobilized, as the scene surrounding her abruptly transforms into the interior of Dr. Weaver's house. She then has a vision of Gabriel beating Dr. Weaver. When Madison notices that the wound at the back of her skull is once more gushing, she screams in despair and immediately wakes up. A few hours later, the police show up to Dr. Weaver's residence to look into the crime scene. In the doctor's old files, Detective Shaw discovers a 1992 photograph of a young female patient, and he asks a colleague to add 30 years to the person's age. Madison is shocked when she learns about Dr. Weaver's passing through television coverage. She claims to have just seen a vision of Dr. Weaver being assassinated, and she just told her sister about it. Madison has a dream that night about Gabriel executing another man at a residence known as Silver Cup with great brutality. This man was Dr. Weaver's colleague. Madison and Gabriel exchange stares after he finishes ending the man, and it is then that she first sees his deformed surroundings. She wakes up yelling, which prompts Sydney, one of her sisters, to hurry over and soothe her. They proceed to the police station, where they tell Detective Sean Moss that Madison has been seeing visions of the previous incidents in the area and could be able to direct them to the scene of the most recent murder. The investigators are dubious about the claim, since it seems ludicrous, but they are nevertheless eager to investigate. The investigators ask her to tell what happened when they find a corpse there as predicted. The investigators, however, think her description is absurd once again. Then, as Gabriel abruptly telephones Madison, Madison excuses herself to visit the restroom. He tells her over the phone that she used to go by Emily, and that they were friends before she was adopted. After this exchange, Madison shakily begins to recollect and addresses the voice as Gabriel. She hangs up the phone after being horrified by this information and departs from the police station. Detective Shaw learns immediately after she leaves that Madison was the little girl in the picture and was a patient of Dr. Weaver. He discovers that Emily May is her true name. Madison, on the other hand, phones her sister and tells her about her latest find. To learn more about Madison's adoption, the two go to their mother's residence. The mother goes to show them an old film of toddler Madison, chatting to nothing during her birthday party, after she speaks the name Gabriel. It turns out that when Madison was a youngster, she had an imaginary companion by the name of Gabriel. Later, Gabriel used a toy phone to contact Madison and threatened to harm Sydney, the unborn child in her mother's womb. Shaw, in the meantime, examines Dr. Weaver's case file and discovers a pattern in which the suspect appears to be picking out Dr. Weaver's former co-workers. And thus far, there is only one person left, Dr. Gregory. Shaw rushes to his location out of worry. Madison had another vision while still at the mother's home, as Gabriel massacres Dr. Gregory in cold blood. Detective Shaw shows up there shortly after and sees the horrific scene. Shaw ignores Madison's attempts to alert him that Gabriel is still in the space. Gabriel approaches him, and the two start fighting. Shaw attempts to shoot him but fails, allowing Gabriel to use his extraordinary agility to escape the structure. Shaw pursues Gabriel through the city's underworld, but he is able to escape once more through the roof. Detective Shaw visits Madison to ask her about her earlier memories in light of this incident, but she is unable to recall anything that occurred before the age of 8. So they see a hypnotist who helps her recall her allegedly suppressed memories. She begins to recall her early years thanks to the hypnosis, and in a subsequent flashback, little Madison is given a call on her toy by Gabriel. Young Madison takes a knife from the kitchen and appears to be preparing to slice herself a piece of cake. However, when Madison enters her parents' bedroom, she is seen holding a knife over her adoptive mother's growing tummy, demonstrating how badly Gabriel wanted to get rid of the unborn child. The psychiatrist awakens Madison and helps her feel calmer because the recollection is making her aggressive. At Gabriel's lair, in the meantime, Serena the tour guide eventually manages to escape her restraints. However, the floor gives way, and the woman tumbles to the ground in front of Madison and everyone else in the room, revealing that Gabriel's hideout had been in Madison's attic all along. Madison is detained by the police in the questioning area, despite the overwhelming amount of evidence against her. Madison maintains denying that she is the one assassinating, but she is unable to explain why Serena was at her residence. Madison becomes enraged and shouts, which causes the lights in the room to all burst after realizing the cops do not believe her. Detective Shaw gets a call from Gabriel at the same moment. Madison has no responsibility, according to him, and it is all his fault. Sydney does some independent research, since she cannot accept the idea that her sister was detained. She visits the hospital and gathers Madison's old adoption papers. Sydney is unaffected by the hospital's abandonment. She quickly makes a beeline for the archive area, where she eventually locates Madison's recordings and files. She listens to the recording at home with her mother, which is a recording of a young woman called Serena May. After being molested, she became pregnant and gave birth to a child she called Emily May, before giving the baby to the research hospital so that Dr. Weaver could experiment on it. According to the video, Madison's, or Emily May's, birth mother is Serena. Serena is now in the hospital following her fall from the ceiling, and Detective Shaw learns that Serena is Madison's biological mother after further reviewing Dr. Weaver's records. Sydney continues to view the film, which shows Emily as a little child. In the hospital, she just sacrificed another child, but she claims to Dr. Weaver that it wasn't her fault since Gabriel was in her head, whispering awful things to her. However, it becomes clear that Gabriel wasn't an imagined buddy after all when the camera pans to Madison's back. He is Madison's parasitic twin, bound to her head and back. Later in the film, Dr. Weaver reveals more research, which shows that Gabriel is able to influence Madison's perception of events and would take advantage of her to carry out his orders. Gabriel is uncontrollable, so the doctors decided to remove him surgically, labeling him a cancer. Madison and Gabriel essentially have the same brain, hence they are unable to entirely remove Gabriel's brain from Madison. Madison is kept in a temporary detention cell at the police station throughout this time. The other criminals all team up against her and begin beating her senseless, till she falls on the ground. She has head pain once more. Something else, who is none other than Gabriel, physically appears from the back of her skull as she fights to endure the pain, indicating that Gabriel has been using Madison's body to commit murders for the whole time. Gabriel massacred all the physicians who were responsible for trying to get rid of him after taking over Madison's body. Madison was able to observe every murder from her subconscious, but she was unable to fully control her mind or body, thus she was unconscious of what was really happening. The other ladies in the cell cry in terror as Gabriel executes them with his own hands. Gabriel is repeatedly shot at by the cop, but he is able to get the keys from him and flee. Sydney has the solution now that she has watched the videos. She informs Detective Shaw of everything via phone. According to her theory, Gabriel was asleep for all these years, until Madison's husband banged her skull against the wall, at which point Gabriel awoke and has been controlling her body ever since. Gabriel begins to murder the police officers at the police station, while retrieving his favorite weapon from the evidence room. During this meeting, he also renders Shaw and Moss inoperable. He is apprehended by Sydney and Shaw at the hospital where Serena is being treated. Gabriel injures Shaw badly, and Sydney is pinned to the wall by a hospital bed that Gabriel threw. Sydney tells Madison that because Gabriel was consuming her fetuses, she had all those miscarriages. Devastated by the realization, Madison awakens and regains control of her body by projecting themselves into a dark mental landscape. Madison entraps a skeptic Gabriel and declares that she is now in charge and that Gabriel's abilities now belong to her. Gabriel promises Madison that he will return one day as she departs, leaving him to fester in the mindscape. Madison exits the mindscape after saying that she will be waiting for him when he returns. With her body fully under control and back in the hospital, Madison uses her newly discovered superhuman power to raise the hospital bed and pin Sydney to the wall. They embrace, as Madison states that even though she was adopted and is not a blood relative, she has always been her sister and is proud of it. The movie ends with a lamp in the room's corner, which begins to flicker as the two people hug.